Somehow the Acolyte has returned. No, not really, I'm just being silly. But we do actually have a couple of interesting updates for it. We have some new and controversial insights into Leslye Headland's creative process. I have a lot to say about this. It sparked a lot of debate online, as you can imagine. But first, I want to circle back to Star Wars Celebration. I covered all of the announcements, all the trailers, all of the juicy stuff at the time, but there was one panel I didn't talk about, the conversation with Manny Jacinto. When this was first announced, Acolyte fans were hoping that in spite of Disney's comments about the cancellation and the budget, there might be a secret, unprecedented Season 2 announcement. But lo and behold, it never happened. Quite the opposite. Instead of the conversation being a triumph and a launching pad for a future story with these characters, it was actually rather depressing. You guys know, I found the show really disappointing, but still, the character of Chimera was one of the best parts of it. You can say what you want about the writing, the overall direction, the set design, the way they didn't lean into the prequel aesthetic, which they promised, but the actors, especially Manny, do not deserve hate. So he comes onto the stage, and he looks so defeated. I felt really bad for him, because of all the panels at Star Wars Celebration, The Acolyte is the one show where you can't really talk about the future. That door's been closed. It was great to see him celebrated if you are a fan of the show, but it felt very banal. It was like going through the motions, an exercise in futility because there is no Acolyte Season 2, and he knows it. And of course, there were some fans in Japan chanting for a second season, and just like the other actors said, if you're a fan of the series and you want that Season 2, you just gotta keep pushing for it. I don't judge. If you like something I don't, go for it. So that's just the first thing I wanted to address because the video from Celebration got recommended on my YouTube feed before I came to record this video, and it is pretty sad to watch because Manny is a great actor. But on to the main Acolyte topic. So this comes from goldderby.com. The Acolyte creator and cinematographer reveal how they created a handmade aesthetic to honor the original Star Wars. Now, when I talk about media that I didn't enjoy, I always want to be respectful for those who did. But I will just say I do have so many disagreements with this. We're going to go through this, I want to see their perspective, and I'm going to give you some of my arguments. I'm not just going to give you the blanket, oh, bad writing, bad this, bad that. I'm actually going to give some constructive feedback to why I think the elements being spoken about didn't work. And I guess the main thing that I want to dispute, the crux of all of this, is the claim that The Acolyte was very similar to the prequel trilogy, because there is a popular assertion that The Acolyte and the prequel trilogy have a lot in common. As a prequel fan myself, as someone who will defend The Phantom Menace and some of the most controversial aspects of Attack of the Clones, I personally don't agree with that comparison. So let's dive in. They say this: for Leslye Headland, creator of The Acolyte on Disney+, everything started with the visual language Lucas established in 1977. She says, we absolutely wanted to honor the way he chose to shoot the original Star Wars. So she's talking about A New Hope. The stuff that really inspired him beyond his love of sci-fi was documentary filmmaking and racing documentaries. There was a lot of static camera. There isn't a lot of movement. And she says she hoped to avoid, quote, going in there and trying to make something not feel like Star Wars. So I think a big part of what she's talking about, and there's more of it in some of the comments she's going to make in just a moment, is retrofuturism. It's sci-fi, but it doesn't look like it was filmed in 2024. It's a space opera universe and a galaxy far, far away, as imagined in the 1970s. That's always going to be hard to replicate, especially when you're making a show set during the High Republic, which was already very vibrant and visually very colourful. But aside from some of the set design and the dulling down of some of the visual effects, I don't think she achieved what she set out to do. But let's go a bit deeper first. So to do this, she enlisted cinematographer Teague, whom she had previously worked with on Russian Doll. Since they both live in Brooklyn, they took a long walk around Prospect Park prior to shooting to discuss the show's visual style. And during that time, Headland started to download to me everything she'd been thinking about. This included all of her influences from Star Wars, but also Chinese martial arts. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but I broke down one of the original teasers for the show with Diana Lena Santo from the Ahsoka show, and she's a martial artist. And I have to say, for all of the show's flaws, the physicality and the choreography and the lightsaber fights were some of the best aspects of it. So in that sense, they did a pretty good job. So now we come on to the comment which has been clipped and spoken about and really caused something of a ruckus. So Leslye had a straightforward approach on the visual side of things. Leslye would say, what would George do? What would George Lucas think? And that was our guiding principle. For instance, if we're going to move the camera, it needs to mean something. It needs to underline some part of the narrative, or it needs to be connected in some aspect of the choreography. Now this is where I start to really disagree with her, because I know she's a fan, but I don't think she understands George Lucas's style of filmmaking, the ethos of the Star Wars universe when it comes to the storytelling, and I guess the biggest difference, his bold cinematic style. I mean, sure, on the surface, she may have thought like George Lucas in the sense that she wanted to do things her way, but even in a claim like the purposeful camera movement, Lucas was way more experimental. Leslie's looking at it from the outside. George Lucas created this universe. He knew he was limited by the visual effects available to him back in the day, so instead, he took inspiration from the likes of Kubrick and Kurosawa and pioneered his own style of cinematic techniques. For instance, parallel editing, motion control photography, and most famously, Dijkstraflex. This allowed the camera to move exactly the same way over and over again. This was important for filming models like spaceships and combining shots, for miniatures, for ships, for lasers, for stars, you name it. It's most famously used in the opening shot and the Death Star trench run. The Acolyte utilizes modern filmmaking techniques. It's really hard to get that retro feel. It's doable, but I don't think the Acolyte's color palettes or sets did it any justice. If anything, The Mandalorian comes closer. When done right, you really feel the mythos of George Lucas's universe. I didn't feel that with the Acolyte. But sometimes it's best to go your own way. If she truly wanted to be like George Lucas, she would have taken the latter approach. Some might argue the Acolyte's biggest weakness is its constraints. In some ways, yes, her decision-making was quite bold and daring, but Lucas wasn't afraid to alienate his audience. That might sound really controversial, but think about it. He made decisions that serve his story of Star Wars, but I would say the Acolyte is a bit too cautious. It didn't push the envelope in any meaningful sense. It seeks modern critical acceptance. It felt like an emulation and a caricature of Star Wars instead of really pushing the boundaries of the universe, which ironically, other High Republic stories do. I'll give you one simple example. I know she's talking about the original Star Wars trilogy, but if we're talking about George, let's talk about episodes 1, 2, and 3 as well. George constantly tried to redefine new aesthetics, alien worlds, alien species, planets, political systems, visual language, you name it, that really took us to a galaxy far, far away. But the Acolyte feels more constrained. And sure, there were 1 or 2 new aliens here and there, but it felt like it was playing it safe in terms of innovation. Even its Force philosophy when it came to the Brendok witches borrowed from existing ideas. And instead of going further and leaning into the fantasy elements, they made it more Earth-like. It was pulled back. I've spoken about this before, and there is the question of how much of this was Leslye, how much was Dave Filoni and Lucasfilm. As a guiding principle, what would George do? I agree with Leslye. But did it show in the final product? I'm gonna say no. But next in the interview, she talks about the color palette in The Acolyte, how the look of the show had to convey this is 100 years before The Phantom Menace. She said she didn't want the colors to look too vibrant, she didn't want the show to be too realistic. And the cinematographer admits they went for a more handmade look, practical effects, instead of reliance on CG, instead of the grandiose sci-fi aesthetic of the prequel trilogy. And I guess that's why I personally can't make that connection. It doesn't feel like in 100 years The Phantom Menace is gonna happen. And this is a complaint I've had across Disney Plus Star Wars shows, at least some of them, like Book of Boba Fett, Kenobi, and now The Acolyte. It looks like a set. It doesn't feel like a huge, expansive galaxy far, far away. The Star Wars saga is operatic, it's mythic in tone, and The Acolyte felt very boxed in. I said this when the show came out, so I personally don't feel that the intentions of the showrunner were conveyed on screen. The tone of The Acolyte was quieter, it was more intimate and grounded, but for me it didn't hit the right notes. We're meant to feel a certain way about the Jedi and especially Sol, but to me the morality of the show, whether it's the Jedi or the Sith, felt a bit all over the place. It didn't feel like something George Lucas would make, even if that was Leslye Headland's aim. But what do you think? Those are my thoughts. Share yours in the comments down below.